The stainless steel table was slick with arterial blood. Dr. Abigail Miller didn't hesitate, plunging her bare-gloved hands into the chest of Chicago's most feared man to stop the bleeding. She saved his life, then watched him vanish into the night. 3 hours later, he gave the order, "Bring me that woman." The fluorescent lights of Cook County Hospital's emergency department flickered, casting a sickly yellow pallor over Trauma Bay 3. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the hour when the city's worst secrets bled out onto the linoleum floors. Dr. Abigail Miller stood over a stainless steel sink, scrubbing iodine from her forearms. Abby was a woman who unapologetically took up space. At 34, she was fat, with a soft, round face, a pronounced double chin, and a heavy, deeply curved frame that her XXXL teal scrubs could barely contain. While junior residents often whispered behind her back about her weight, their mockery evaporated the second the trauma doors blew open. In the operating room, her size was a weapon. Her broad shoulders and thick thighs gave her an immovable center of gravity, and her commanding, booming voice could cut through the most chaotic panics. She was brilliant or steady and entirely unfazed by the violence that washed up on her shores. "Doctor," Nurse Patty shouted from the triage desk, her voice cracking, "we need you in Bay 1. Now!" Abby didn't run, she never ran. She strode with heavy, purposeful steps down the corridor. As she turned the corner, the stench of copper and gunpowder hit her like a physical blow. 4 men in tailored, blood-soaked Italian suits were screaming at the triage staff. They looked like they had stepped out of a nightmare, their faces bruised, heavy semi-automatic weapons swinging openly by their sides. In the center of the chaos, slung between 2 of the giants, was a man rapidly bleeding out onto the pristine white tiles. "Save him!" One of the men roared, pressing the barrel of a Glock against the chest of a trembling first-year resident. "If he dies, I'll kill every single one of you in this room." Abby pushed through the swinging doors, her massive presence immediately drawing the room's attention. She didn't look at the gun. She didn't look at the screaming men. She looked at the patient. "Get that gun out of my resident's face before I shove it down your throat." Abby barked her voice, a low, gravelly baritone that echoed off the tile walls. The gunman, a scarred enforcer named Leo, blinked in shock. He looked at the fat, unimposing woman in the oversized scrubs, ready to backhand her, but Abby had already bypassed him. She shoved her considerable weight against the gurney, wedging herself between the mobsters and her patient. "Patty, I need 2 large-bore IVs, push a liter of lactated ringers, and get a negative blood on a rapid infuser." Abby ordered, her thick, incredibly dexterous fingers already tearing open the man's ruined dress shirt. The patient was Adrian Sterling. Even pale and slipping into hypovolemic shock, the head of the Sterling crime family was striking. He had sharp, aristocratic features and thick, dark hair matted with sweat. But Abby didn't care about his mafia pedigree or his looks. She cared about the 2 gaping bullet holes in his upper left chest, bubbling with frothy red blood. He caught 2 from a sawed-off in an ambush on Lower Wacker Drive. Leo grunted, lowering his weapon, slightly unnerved by the doctor's glacial calm. "Tension pneumothorax. His lung is collapsing and an artery is nicked," Abby said, feeling the frantic, fluttering pulse at his neck. His blood pressure was tanking. Scalpel. 10 blade. Now. She didn't wait for anesthesia. There was no time. Using her formidable strength, she pressed one heavy forearm across Adrian's uninjured shoulder to pin him down, while her other hand made a precise, brutal incision between his ribs. Blood sprayed, splattering across Abby's cheeks and neck, but she didn't blink. She grabbed a chest tube and forced it into the cavity, listening for the hiss of escaping air. Adrian's eyes snapped open. The agony was blinding, but through the hazy red mist of his fading consciousness, he didn't see the sterile ceiling. He saw her. He saw a woman with a flushed, full face, her dark hair slipping out of her surgical cap and sticking to her sweat-drenched forehead. He felt the heavy grounding weight of her soft arm pinning him down, and the surprising, delicate precision of her thick fingers working inside his chest. He was drowning in pain, but her presence was a warm, unshakable anchor. "Stay with me, Mr. Sterling," Abby commanded, locking her dark brown eyes onto his fading blue ones. "You are not dying on my table tonight. Do you understand me?" Adrian couldn't speak, but he managed a microscopic nod before the darkness pulled him under. For 45 minutes, Abby waged a war against death. She clamped the torn subclavian artery, her soft hands covered in his blood stitching and packing the wound with a relentless mechanical efficiency. The Mafia enforcers watched in stunned silence. They had expected a panic-stricken civilian. Instead, they were witnessing a general commanding a battlefield. "BP is stabilizing," Patty whispered, wiping a streak of blood from the monitor. 85/60. He's holding. Abby let out a long, heavy exhale, her broad shoulders slumping slightly. "Get him prepped for the ICU. He needs a surgical team for the arterial repair, but he's out of the woods for the next 10 minutes. No ICU." Leo stepped forward, his tone dropping, the panic replaced by a cold, lethal authority. Abby turned her heavy hands, resting on her wide hips. "Excuse me. He needs round-the-clock monitoring and a vascular surgeon. If you move him, he'll bleed out in the back of your SUV. If we leave him here, Arthur Flanagan's men will finish the job before sunrise," Leo countered, signaling the other men. They smoothly lifted the gurney. "You stabilized him. We have private doctors waiting at a safe house. You are making a fatal mistake," Abby warned, taking a heavy step forward, ready to physically block the door. Leo stopped looking at the fat, furious doctor, covered in his boss's blood. A flicker of genuine respect crossed his hardened face. "You saved his life, Doc. Do yourself a favor. Forget what you saw tonight." Before Abby could call security, the men rushed the gurney out the emergency exit, bursting into the rainy Chicago night. Abby stood alone in the trauma bay, the walls painted in Adrian Sterling's blood, her chest heaving. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a red smear across her skin. 7 hours later, the rain was still hammering against the concrete pillars of the Harrison Street parking garage. Abby's shift had ended at 9 a.m. Every joint in her body ached. Her feet throbbed in her clogs, and the sheer physical toll of carrying her heavy frame through a 14-hour trauma shift was begging for a hot shower and her memory foam mattress. She had changed out of her bloody scrubs into a pair of loose grey sweatpants and an oversized black hoodie, burying her cold hands in her pockets as she walked toward her beat-up Honda Civic on the dimly lit 3rd floor. Across the city, in a heavily fortified estate in Winnetka, Adrian Sterling was awake. He was lying in a California king bed, hooked up to a private IV line, his chest heavily bandaged. His private physician had just finished repairing the artery Abby had clamped. The hospital doctor, the private surgeon, murmured to Leo, packing his bag. Whoever she was, she performed a miracle. The clamp placement was perfect. A millimeter to the left, and he would have bled out on the street. Adrian stared at the ceiling, the heavy painkillers dulling his physical agony, but doing nothing to quiet his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about her. In his world, women were fragile, ornamental things, thin, manicured, and terrified of the violence he represented. But the doctor, she was different. She was massive, solid, and completely devoid of fear. He remembered the feeling of her soft, heavy body pressing against him, anchoring his soul to the earth when it had been trying to leave his body. He remembered the absolute fury in her voice when she ordered his men to back down. Leo Adrian rasped his voice, raw. Leo stepped to the bedside. "Boss, you need to rest. We're tracking Flanagan's hit squad now." The doctor Adrian breathed, shifting his weight and wincing. "The one at the hospital. Find her." "Doc, she's a civilian, Adrian. Let her be." Adrian turned his head, his cold, calculating eyes locking onto his underboss. "Flanagan has moles in Cook County. By now they know a doctor saved me. They'll kill her just to send a message." Adrian paused, a dark, possessive shadow crossing his face. "Bring me that woman, unharmed. Do it now." Back in the parking garage, Abby pressed the unlock button on her key fob. The Civic chirped. Before she could reach the door handle, the screech of heavy tires echoed through the concrete structure. A black Lincoln Navigator materialized from the shadows blocking her car. Abby froze, her survival instincts flaring. She didn't scream. She reached into her hoodie pocket, her thick fingers wrapping around the canister of pepper spray she carried for late-night shifts. The doors of the SUV opened, and 3 men stepped out. Abby recognized the scarred face of the leader immediately. It was Leo. "Dr. Miller." Leo said smoothly, holding his hands up to show he wasn't holding a weapon. "Please step away from the vehicle. If you take one more step, you're getting bear mace directly in the retinas." Abby warned, her voice steady, planting her heavy boots wide on the damp concrete. She braced her weight, preparing for a physical fight. "Doc, we don't have time for this." Leo sighed, glancing at his watch. "Mr. Sterling requests your presence. It's not a request you can decline." "I'm a trauma surgeon, not a house call concierge for the Mafia," Abby spat back. "Get out of my way." She lunged toward her car door, but they were too fast. 2 men flanked her. Abby threw a brutal elbow, catching one of the mobsters in the jaw. Her sheer mass and strength sent him stumbling backward with a cursed grunt. She sprayed a wide arc of pepper spray, but Leo tackled her from the side. Despite her weight, the kinetic force of the large man knocked the wind out of her. They didn't hit her, but they used their combined strength to pin her thick arms against her sides. "I'm sorry," Doc Leo grunted, struggling to hold her as she thrashed violently, using her hips to try and throw him off. "But you're coming with us. Get her in the truck." They muscled her into the back of the Navigator, locking the child-proof doors. Abby sat in the leather seat, panting heavily, her heart hammering against her ribs. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, terrifying reality. She had just been kidnapped by the Chicago mob. The ride lasted 45 minutes. Abby stared out the tinted windows in silence, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. She memorized the turns, taking Lakeshore Drive, north, transitioning onto Sheridan Road, heading deep into the affluent, sprawling estates of the North Shore. When the SUV finally parked, she was escorted out into the freezing morning air. The estate was massive, a stone fortress, surrounded by high iron gates and security cameras. Leo led her up the sweeping marble staircase and down a long, opulent hallway lined with classical art. He opened heavy mahogany double doors and gestured for her to enter. Abby stepped inside. The master bedroom was suffocatingly warm, smelling of expensive cologne and antiseptic. In the center of the room, propped up against a mountain of pillows, was Adrian Sterling. He looked paler than he had in the ER, but his eyes were sharp, burning into her as she entered. Abby didn't cower. She stood in the center of the room, her heavy frame, imposing her chin, held high, letting her anger override her fear. "Is this how you say thank you?" Abby demanded, her baritone voice dripping with venom. "You send your goons to assault me in a parking garage." Adrian watched her. He noted the way her oversized hoodie clung to her broad shoulders, the way her soft, round cheeks were flushed with fury. She was magnificent. "I apologize for the lack of manners," Adrian said, his voice a low, raspy purr that sent an involuntary shiver down Abby's spine. But asking politely wasn't an option. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Abby crossed her thick arms over her chest. "I am the chief trauma attending. When I don't show up for my shift tomorrow, the police will tear this city apart looking for me." "They won't," Adrian replied calmly, adjusting the IV line taped to his hand. "Because officially, Dr. Abigail Miller took a sudden, indefinite leave of absence to care for a sick relative in Ohio. Your hospital administration has already been compensated for the inconvenience." Abby's stomach dropped. The sheer power required to orchestrate that in a matter of hours was terrifying. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice losing a fraction of its volume. Adrian's expression hardened. "Because 30 minutes after you clocked out, 2 men dressed as hospital janitors entered the physician locker room at Cook County. They were Arthur Flanagan's men, the Irish mob. They had silenced pistols, and they were looking for the fat doctor who stitched up my chest." Abby's breath hitched. She felt the blood drain from her face. "They know what you did, Abigail." Adrian continued, his voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "In their eyes, you didn't just perform your medical duty. You chose a side in a war. If I had left you in that parking garage, you would be in a body bag by noon." Abby stared at him, her logical brain trying to find the lie, but the grim sincerity in Adrian's eyes offered no comfort. She slowly sank into a plush velvet armchair near the bed, the reality of her situation crashing down on her heavy shoulders. So what Abby whispered, her hands shaking slightly as she rested them on her thick thighs. "I'm a prisoner here." "You are a guest," Adrian corrected, his gaze softening as it traced the curve of her jaw, the fullness of her lips. "You will remain here under my protection until Flanagan is no longer a threat. And in return, Abby interrupted, her eyes narrowing. Adrian smirked, a dangerous, possessive gleam returning to his eyes. "In return, you are going to be my exclusive personal physician. You belong to the Sterling family now, Doctor. Get used to the arrangement." For 3 weeks, the sprawling limestone mansion overlooking Lake Michigan became Abby's entire universe. The Winnetka estate was a fortress of marble and mahogany, guarded by men with cold eyes and concealed weapons. To the outside world, Dr. Abigail Miller was on an extended family leave. Inside these walls, she was a prisoner, wrapped in silk and danger. But Abby refused to act like a captive. "Sit still," she commanded, her deep, booming voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the master suite. She stood over Adrian, holding a pair of surgical scissors. She wore custom scrubs that Adrian had ordered for her expensive, breathable fabric that accommodated her broad shoulders, heavy breasts, and wide hips perfectly. Adrian sat on the edge of the California king bed, his chest-bare muscles tense as she carefully snipped the sutures from his healing incision. "You have the bedside manner of a drill sergeant, Doctor, and you have the survival instincts of a toddler," Abby shot back, not looking up. Her thick, incredibly steady fingers worked with mechanical precision. "If I catch you trying to lift weights in the West Wing gym again, before your subclavian artery is fully scarred over, I'm going to medically induce a coma." Adrian chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated against her soft knuckles. He didn't pull away. Instead, his piercing blue eyes mapped the topography of her face. He watched the way her heavy brow furrowed in concentration, the way her double chin pressed against her collar as she leaned over him, and the solid, undeniable mass of her body taking up space in his room. In Adrian's ruthless world of Chicago syndicates and superficial high society women starved themselves to become fragile ornaments. They were aerodynamic and terrified. Abby was none of those things. She was a mountain. She was soft, dense, and immovable, carrying her weight with a powerful, commanding grace that intoxicated him. "You're staring," Sterling Abby muttered, tossing the bloody gauze into a biohazard bag she'd made Leo source from Northwestern Memorial. "I'm admiring my savior," Adrian replied softly. He reached up his large, calloused hand, wrapping around her thick wrist. He didn't force her, but he held her there, testing her reaction. Abby froze. Her heart slammed a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but she didn't pull away. She looked down into his eyes, seeing the lethal, obsessive hunger simmering just beneath the surface. "I am not one of your sycophants, Adrian. I don't melt because a dangerous man looks at me," she warned, though her voice had lost its usual thunder. "I know," he murmured. His hand slid from her wrist, tracing the soft, heavy curve of her forearm up to the solid width of her shoulder, before resting gently on her hip. His thumb pressed into the plush curve of her waist. "If I wanted someone who melted, I wouldn't have brought you here. I wanted the woman who looked down the barrel of a Glock and threatened to shove it down my enforcer's throat." A shiver raced down Abby's spine. The sheer heat radiating from his touch short-circuited her logical mind. She was a woman of science, a creature of high-pressure trauma bays and sterile environments. But here, trapped in the gilded cage of a mafia boss, she was feeling things she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She felt entirely seen, not despite her size, but because of it. "You need rest," Abby managed to say, taking a step back, her chest heaving. "Your blood pressure is elevated. My blood pressure is exactly where it should be when you're standing that close to me, Abigail." Adrian smirked, leaning back against the pillows. Before she could form a sharp retort, the heavy oak doors of the bedroom swung open. Leo stepped in, his face drawn tight. Behind him stood Carmine, a high-ranking capo with a sharp jaw and darting eyes. "We have a problem," Leo announced, his eyes flicking to Abby. "Arthur Flanagan's crew just hit 2 of our supply warehouses in the South Loop. It was a coordinated strike. They knew the patrol schedules." Adrian's demeanor instantly shifted from seductive to deadly. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Someone gave them the roots. "We're looking into it," Carmine said smoothly, stepping forward. "But you need to be moved to the Glencoe safe house, boss. This estate is too exposed if there's a rat in our ranks." Abby watched the exchange, her sharp medical intuition bleeding into her situational awareness. She noticed the slight sheen of sweat on Carmine's upper lip. She noticed how his hand hovered just an inch too close to his suit jacket. In the ER, Abby read microscopic changes in a patient's body language to predict when they would crash. Carmine was crashing. "He shouldn't be moved," Abby interjected, crossing her heavy arms. A bumpy ride in an armored vehicle could rupture the healing tissue. Carmine sneered, looking at Abby with undisguised disgust. "Stay out of family business, sweetheart. Go fetch some bandages." Abby didn't flinch. She stepped directly into Carmine's personal space, using her imposing height and massive frame to force him to take a half step back. "I am the chief of trauma, you little weasel, and I'm telling you if you move him, he bleeds out. So unless your medical degree is hidden in that cheap polyester suit, shut your mouth." Adrian barked a harsh laugh, thoroughly delighted. "Listen to the doctor, Carmine. We stay." Carmine's jaw tightened. He shot Abby a look of pure venom before turning on his heel and storming out. Leo lingered for a moment, giving Abby a nod of profound respect before following him. That night, Abby couldn't sleep. The tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. She lay in her guest room, down the hall from Adrian, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the estate's security detail, pacing the grounds. Something was wrong. Her gut, which had never lied to her in the trauma bay, was screaming. At 2:14 a.m., exactly 3 weeks after Adrian Sterling had bled out on her table, the Winnetka estate erupted. The blast shattered the reinforced glass of the lake-facing windows. The concussive wave threw Abby from her mattress, her heavy body hitting the Persian rug with a brutal thud. Alarms began to shriek, slicing through the chaotic pop, pop, pop of suppressed automatic gunfire in the hallways. Abby didn't panic. The adrenaline hit her bloodstream like a familiar friend. She scrambled to her feet, her bare soles slapping against the hardwood. She grabbed the heaviest thing in her room, a solid brass lamp, and ripped the cord from the wall. She threw open her door. The hallway was filled with smoke and the metallic stench of blood. 2 of Adrian's guards were dead on the floor. Carmine, her brain supplied instantly. He gave Flanagan the security codes. She ran down the hall toward the master suite, her heavy thighs churning, her chest burning. She burst through Adrian's double doors. Adrian was out of bed, a customized Sig Sauer in his hand, firing into the darkness of the balcony. Blood was seeping through his white t-shirt. He had torn his stitches. "Abby, get down!" Adrian roared as bullets chewed through the mahogany doorframe. 3 men in tactical gear spilled into the room from the hallway. They weren't Adrian's men. One of them raised a shotgun, aiming directly at Adrian's back. Abby didn't think. She let out a guttural, terrifying roar, utilizing every pound of her massive frame. She charged the gunman like a freight train, swinging the heavy brass lamp with devastating force. The brass connected with the side of the hitman's helmet with a sickening crack. The man went down hard, his shotgun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. The sheer kinetic force of her tackle sent Abby crashing to the floor alongside him. The second hitman turned his weapon toward her, but Adrian was faster. 2 suppressed shots echoed in the room, and the man dropped a neat hole between his eyes. The third man hesitated, seeing his partners fall, and turned to run. Adrian shot him in the back of the knee, sending him sprawling into the hallway, before limping over and executing him with cold mechanical precision. Silence descended on the room, broken only by the shrieking alarms and Abby's ragged breathing. She pushed herself up to her knees, her thick chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly giving way to shock. Her hands were covered in the first hitman's blood. She looked up at Adrian. He stood amidst the carnage, looking like a dark, vengeful god. He dropped the gun, wincing as he clutched his bleeding chest and fell to his knees in front of her. "Are you hit?" Adrian demanded, his hands frantically roaming over her wide shoulders, her thick arms, her soft face checking for bullet holes. "Abigail, look at me. Are you hit?" "No!" she gasped, catching his wrists. She looked at his chest. "But you are. You tore the sutures. You idiot, you're bleeding again." "I don't care." He breathed, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. His hands gripped her heavy waist tightly, as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "You saved my life. Again. You fought for me. I'm a doctor," she whispered, her hands instinctively pressing against his chest wound to apply pressure. "I fight for my patients. You are not just my doctor," Adrian said, pulling back to look deep into her eyes. The mask of the untouchable Mafia Boss was completely stripped away, revealing the raw, obsessive devotion beneath. "Flanagan is dead. My men will clean out Carmine and the rest of the rats tonight. You are free, Abigail. If you walk out that door right now, I will give you $1 million, a new identity, and you will never see me again." Abby stopped breathing. The offer was everything she had wanted 3 weeks ago. She could go back to the hospital. She could go back to her quiet, exhausted life. She looked at the blood on her hands. She looked at the terrifying, beautiful man kneeling before her, treating her like she was the most precious, powerful creature on earth. She didn't want the quiet life anymore. Abby's hand slid from his chest, moving up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt. She used her strength to pull him closer, her soft, full lips crashing against his in a desperate, bruising kiss. Adrian groaned, burying his hands in her dark hair, kissing her back with a fierce, territorial hunger that threatened to consume them both. When they finally broke apart, Abby looked at him, her dark eyes flashing with absolute certainty. "I'm not going anywhere, Sterling," she said, her deep voice vibrating with power. "But if you ever try to lift weights before I clear you again, I will shoot you myself." Adrian smiled a genuine, breathtaking expression and rested his hand over her thundering heart. "Yes, ma'am. What a wild, pulse-pounding ride. If you loved this intense, rule-breaking mafia romance, where a strong, unapologetic heroine claims her dark king, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button if Dr. Abby Miller is your new favorite badass. Share this story with your friends who crave gritty, high-stakes drama with an unexpected twist, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another thrilling, steamy romance. Let us know in the comments what you want to hear next.